Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Joining us today is Dr. Micah Jansen, a Managing Technical Services Veterinarian with Zoetis. We want to encourage those of you that are joining us online to post any questions you have in the chat area on your screen. If you're joining us from social media, feel free to post your comments and questions directly in those channels. So, Dr. Jansen, let's start by going back to last fall when there was information related to EXCEDE for swine. It was presented at the Layman Swine Conference. What did that presentation focus on, and who all was involved in that work?
So that presentation was delivered by Sarah Lutz, and Sarah Lutz is a veterinary student at Auburn University. She spent the last summer with Zoetis during the swine veterinary internship program, and she collaborated with myself as well as Dr. Doug Powers on a project that evaluated the short-term pharmacokinetics of EXCEDE for swine. And we specifically looked at how those pharmacokinetics related to the minimum inhibitory concentration, or MIC90 values, for strep suis. We know that strep suis continues to be a growing problem for both producers and practitioners. And so we wanted to make sure that as we looked at those pharmacokinetic values, that we were understanding how they matched up against a pathogen like strep suis that can cause so many issues and respiratory disease in pigs.
So then what questions did that research focus on and really, try to answer?
As I mentioned, we wanted to know more about the short-term pharmacokinetics of EXCEDE for swine, and that's really because we've known about the longer-term pharmacokinetics of EXCEDE for a long time. There was previously published data that's available with the, any bottle of EXCEDE for swine that you can obtain. That inserts there, and you can see that information right there. And what that information showed was the pharmacokinetics beginning at 1 hour post-injection of EXCEDE for swine. And so the objective of this study was to dive into the first 60 minutes after injecting EXCEDE for swine into pigs and really understanding what those pharmacokinetic behaviors looked like.
You mentioned pharmacokinetics and MIC values. Talk to us about what those terms mean, why they're important for producers when they're making decisions about what antibiotics to use to treat swine respiratory disease.
So pharmacokinetics is really the study of looking at how a pharmaceutical product behaves in an animal. So not only what levels can it reach from a therapeutic standpoint, but then also how quickly does it reach those levels and how long does it remain above those therapeutic levels. Often we define therapeutic levels, especially when we look at products like antibiotics, as MIC values. So MIC stands for minimum inhibitory concentration. And we will often list either an MIC90 or an MIC50. And those numbers that are associated with MIC are indicating a percentage. We want to understand what level does the antibiotic need to be to inhibit that percentage of isolates of a specific pathogen. So in this study in particular, we wanted to understand those pharmacokinetic levels based on the MIC90 for strep suis. And so the most recently published MIC90 value for strep suis would indicate that that's 2.0 micrograms per mil. So we wanted to know how quickly does EXCEDE for swine reach those levels.
So then how did they go about that study? How was it conducted and what were the results? And talk to us too. Were there any surprises?
So in that study, we looked at a group of pigs, and the first thing we did was we collected blood from all of those pigs. And then we administered an intramuscular dose of EXCEDE for swine on label. And then we continued to sample from those pigs at several time points. So we looked at 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and 60 minutes, again, to really understand at a granular level, what do those pharmacokinetic behaviors look like in those pigs? after we had those samples, we sent them off to a lab that conducts pharmacokinetic testing, and they were able to run a test that looks at not only the concentration of EXCEDE for swine, but also the metabolite that it does form after it's administered to an animal, and specifically to pigs. And so they were able to measure those values to share what the levels looked like. We, again, were looking at 2.0 micrograms per mil because that's the MIC90 for strep suis. And we found that at 15 minutes, nearly all the pigs were over that value. There was only one pig remaining that didn't surpass that threshold. And then by 30 minutes, we found that all pigs were above that MIC90 value for strep suis. I didn't really know what to expect in the study because, again, we didn't know what these values would look like, but I was really pleasantly surprised to find how quickly it did reach those levels.
So your surprise was how quickly it got to those levels.
Yep. We know it has its own duration, but we just didn't know what to expect in the short term.
Why are the results important to veterinarians as well as producers?
I think there are a lot of things that both producers and practitioners really have to take into account when they are making decisions around antibiotic protocols and what they should be putting in place in their pigs. And that covers a lot of things. I think the duration of activity or onset of activity in terms of those therapeutic levels that an antibiotic needs to meet. But we also need to look at things like, what are the MIC values? What tissues would those antibiotics, be penetrating and acting in? And then even the practical stuff, how hard is it to administer, or how many doses does it take? Labor is really important to us in the industry, and it's something that we are always challenged with. And so even things like that, of how many doses or what's the duration of therapy after one injection, all of those things can really factor into decisions that they're making. Labeled pathogens, there's many different things that they're factoring. And so the more that we know about behaviors of what we're using, it can just be more helpful for practitioners to be able to make those decisions and guide their clients or their systems that they're working with in determining the best protocols to implement.
So now that we know how quickly EXCEDE for swine reaches therapeutic levels, what about the outcomes of using EXCEDE for swine to treat swine respiratory disease? What can producers expect?
So EXCEDE has been around for nearly 20 years, and it's been something that producers and practitioners have been able to count on to help in times where swine respiratory disease is presenting problems. We recently looked at a summary of 5 different trials that we had conducted in the past. And within that study, I think there's a piece of information that's really interesting. So one of the studies that were a part of the 5 trials that we summarized looked at a side-by-side comparison of pigs that were treated with EXCEDE for swine and pigs that were treated with enrofloxacin. And within that study, we found that during the measurements, we looked at, we did a challenge with APP, but then we also had some, natural infections. And one of those that, often occurs naturally in pigs is strep suis infection. And so with the pigs that received EXCEDE for swine, we found not only lower levels of mortality, but also we isolated lower levels of strep suis when compared to pigs that had received enrofloxacin. So that's just another really nice, confidence builder that practitioners and producers can count on and factor in when they're making these antibiotic decisions.
Very good. Very good information. Dr. Micah Jansen, thank you so much for joining us here today. We appreciate your time and your willingness to share information with us.
Thank you.
Likewise, we appreciate all of you for tuning in and spending a bit of your day with us. This program has been brought to you by Zoetis. A reminder that all Feedstuffs 365 sessions are available at feedstuffs.com. Simply go to Feedstuffs 365 in the nav bar and click there. You can certainly share these with your business colleagues and industry partners. Until next time, for Feedstuffs 365, I'm Sarah Muirhead. you.